So hi Igor, I'm Sarah from The Upcoming. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us about this really incredible film.
Hi, Sarah. Thanks for having me.
No worries.
Happy to do it.
Maybe we could just kick off, for people who don't know anything about your movie, how would you introduce it and give us sort of a brief glimpse about what it's all about, The White Fortress?
So it's sort of like a genre bending coming of age story, um, where we follow a young man, Farouk, as he's sort of trying to make ends meet, and doing a lot of sort of illicit activities, and he stumbles upon a young uh, teenager and they sort of fall in love, and it kind of complicates their lives in a very messy way. So I that's sort of as much as I want to kind of spoil, but it takes
Mm,
place in post-war Sarajevo,
mm,
and is sort of like a look into the young generation that sort of emerged many years after the war.
mm. And I understand it's kind of rooted in your own experiences. So is this a very personal story for you? And what is taken from your life, and how did that influence the story?
Well, once the sort of the main aspect that's sort of informed by things I've observed in that space post-war is that you see a lot of people kind of going in different directions in terms of like wealth, and uh, two extremes have emerged subsequently. Um, uh, like some family members have become extremely wealthy, others have sort of become much poorer after the Bosnian War. So there's these extremes that have emerged in Bosnia Herzegovina, and I kind of wanted to touch upon that. Her family is well-to-do, well-connected, sort of politically, um, sort of tied to that space. He is somebody who came from a respected family, and that family has over the years become sort of decimated and impoverished. So these two extremes is sort of the today's Bosnia. It's sort of what happens in these sort of transitory spaces, or post-war spaces where um, people that used to have a level of security have lost it, and people that uh, other people have taken a lot more of it. So it's like a wild space that doesn't have many laws, or if it does have a lot of laws, they're not respected. Um, and it's a country that doesn't have the tools to create civic society yet, because it's tied to the ethnopolitical sort of question. Everything is tied to like ethnicity, ethnic keys. So the war itself has created a society where young people could not stay there and they want to leave, and that's sort of what really made me want to make this film. This generation that's slowly being lost. They're immigrating to other parts of Europe, North America, Australia, etc. So they don't see a future. You can be as talented as you want to be, and you don't have a space there unless you're connected.
Mm,
Like you have to get a job, you have to pay a bribe to get a job. Like
mm.
it's a very strange society in that respect.
And do you think, were you motivated as well to kind of shine a light on what the reality of life is like there, in the sense that it's not something that we would read about necessarily in the media, or we rarely see on screen? So why did you want to make sure people could get a window into this world, and why do you think it's important to make sure that you have these representations on screen so that you can kind of understand what it must be like for young people growing up there?
Um, it's I feel like the young people in that space don't see themselves on screen. That's like a huge sort of problem. Like there aren't many films made in that space about them. Hardly any, actually, because there's only a handful of films that come from Bosnia and Herzegovina. Like you're lucky if you have like two films in a given space or in a given year. Um, so when you don't see yourself in that space, then there is no agency. Like the ability to create agency is not there. So in many ways, I feel like just an attempt to try and fictionalize an element that's informed by their reality opens up this possibility, right? This ability to kind of have young people kind of engage a bit more with the issues, engage a bit more with their reality. I'm not sure if that answers your question entirely, but in essence, I feel like they are like you're it's like a Stockholm syndrome kind of situation in a way. Like they're not even aware that they have been tied to a system that doesn't believe in their dreams, doesn't believe that they can actually overcome the sort of the ethno-political the of that space. Yeah.
And thinking about, this amazing cast that you've put together, in particular the main two characters, and this young lad, because I think like you have this kind of backdrop of the kind of deprivation that he's been brought up in, and like you say, to get these glimpses of the kind of political situation, whether that's from the news that's being played in the background, but at its heart it's also kind of this love story, and there's this sort of fairy tale element, and we see a lot of emotion from your characters and a lot of vulnerability that you might not expect from a young lad growing up on that kind of estate. So how did you cast for your characters, and how did you work with them to bring out the performances you wanted?
So the casting was twofold. There's we had an open call for a lot of the young actors, except for the person that I really wanted to work with, and we were just sort of waiting to figure out his scheduling, was Pavle, who was the lead, who played Faruk, Pavle Čemerikić, and he's somebody I was sort of followed, like his career I followed, somebody I really wanted to work with. I felt like he had this sort of interiority as an actor that's really hard to find at such a young age, and he came actually from the he wasn't like a professionally trained actor, which I found really fascinating in the sense that often if you have a lot of theatrical training and you're young, sometimes it's really difficult to get that training removed, to get to kind of get that sort of real register that you need for the screen. And then for Mona, that was an open call. Like we found her a few hundred auditioned young women, teenagers auditioned for that role, and she stood out. And we did some chemistry tests with the two of them, and that's how that came to be. And then for the rest of the younger cast, the same thing. It was an open call, but there was a mix of professional actors, or rather actors training to be professionals, who came through the academy system in Sarajevo, who played Kerim Chutura. He was his friend, his best friend. He's actually somebody that's going through the academy system. Then Vrecha, the young boy, he's just somebody that's middle school, or rather about to start high school when we were shooting. So it was just a very, very eclectic mix of people that we found during the open call.
And it feels like it must be very intense on set, kind of filming some of those scenes, and particularly working with pretty young actors. So were there any moments that were particularly challenging, and also what were some of the highlights?
Well, in terms of I did some work on intimacy training, just sort of how to make sure that the actors, they have enough know-how that this is just this is not real, because sometimes feelings can emerge, especially young actors. Feelings can emerge unexpectedly if you're expected to perform intimately, right? Kiss someone or hug someone, right? So there's a lot of kind of talking that goes into it, sort of repetitions and pauses to kind of break that emotion, so they're not kind of in that space for too long when they're shooting and whatnot. So those kinds of little kind of hacks help to kind of set the stage. But in terms of, it was a lot of repetition in terms of just kind of getting them comfortable, like just spending time walking, right? Spending time talking, spending time, a lot of repetition in terms of getting the two comfortable. And it kind of uh, just takes time. I feel like it takes, you show them a space that they're going to be filming in, for example. Like I think that's like a big a very helpful tool rather, to kind of, they have the ability to kind of imagine the space and see what they could do, and then like leaving the room open for some improvisation. And I think both of them kind of embraced that, which I really liked.
Yeah.
So they really stuck to the script in terms of the dialogue beats for to a large extent. And Pauly was coming from Belgrade. He's a Belgrade-based actor, so that is a dialectical kind of difference between Belgrade speakers and Sarajevo speakers, even though it's sort of the same language, Serbo-Croatian, Bosnian, Croatian, Serbian. The equivalent of like UK and American English kind of dialectical kind of variation. So he was very kind of he was very cognizant of wanting to stick to the script, in part because improvising in a foreign dialect is a more challenging. So how do you allow for improv in other ways? And it was through movement in his case. And then in her case, because she's a native Sarajevo speaker, she actually did improvise a bit with her lines a bit more. And I was very open to that.
And it feels like the locations are very important in the film. Kind of, the interior spaces of, like his grandma's house. And of course, the scenes of the fortress, that bit where there's like the sun setting, and there's lots of contrast going on there. So how important was it to get those locations just right? And how did they add to the story and the look and feel of the film for you?
The locations emerged organically in part when I was writing, because like I was spending time in some of these places or walking around the city, and some like the sort of Tabija, the name of the film, the White Fortress, is like a fortification on top of this hill that overlooks the city. And it was always a place I wanted to film in, but the challenges that emerged when the summer we were shooting is that they actually made it like a protected heritage site. Before it was this like wild abandoned space. So like if people were to visit this place after the pandemic, it's not like that accessible anymore. You have to pay, I think 5 km, which is the equivalent of like €2.50 to actually see the space. So it was interesting kind of like trying to work around some of those obstructions. And we managed to do it, like, so it doesn't look like you have to pay to get up there. But the other spaces, yeah, just through sort of like exploring the city, and they were written into that space. I grew up in close to Alipashino, a place called Dobrinja. So Alpashno was a place where I would frequent. I sort of grew up in that space before I left Bosnia during the war. I left when I was 9, and then I started sort of making films there after university.
And just thinking about your, the style of the way you've shot the film, it's very kind of up close to your characters. It kind of feels almost like documentary style at some moments. So, what was your approach, and do you take influence from other filmmakers or other films that you've seen when you're making yours?
There's because you're combining reality with this sort of dreamlike quality. I'm very open to kind of different camera, sort of embracing different kind of camera techniques, and I think it sort of depends on what the story is asking. So we have like steady cam like shots. We have a lot of sort of pans and tilts. There's always movement of some kind usually in the shot, because the characters themselves are very static in their environment in many ways. The movement is sort of created through the interaction with either them or just the camera moving in the space. So the sort of the formal kind of inspiration is like too kind of varied to number. Like, I mean, a lot of filmmakers influence me up to a point, but I don't try to emulate like an aesthetic necessarily. So, you know, everything from you know, Kieślowski to the Dardenne brothers to like even David Fincher, like a lot of different filmmakers kind of inform the process that I undertake. And it's also you also have to be kind of cognizant of how the actors are going to be able to, you know, behave in that space. You know, are there any kind of restrictions that they have? Like, do they have maybe they don't have the experience to sort of allow for certain kinds of blocking, right? Or they don't have the rhythm of movement yet, right? So with Pablo's case, it was kind of very seamless. You could do whatever you kind of threw at him. With other actors, right? If they have like movement limitations or whatnot, then you have to kind of be cognizant of how you kind of use them in a particular space. So yeah, yeah, there's like I said, there's a lot of different references that we looked at when we were making the film that kind of emerged. But like I like to work in an organic way. Before I used to limit myself as to like what kind of shot is acceptable, but with this film, it was a bit more open to kind of finding the perfect sort of way of capturing the emotion of that beat.
And I think the film is interesting in the sense that it shines a light on lots of the problems for young people growing up in that city, and there's perhaps a sense of despair or loss of, you know, the opportunity that perhaps existed before or that could be there now. But then equally, there's kind of an affection and a love for the city and maybe a sense of hope for the future in the fact that these two young people found each other, had this connection, and they found love despite their circumstances. So would you say in that sense there's kind of two sides to it, or at least despite what it's shining a light upon in terms of the problems, there's also this positive side to it too?
That's right. So like, I mean, like I always want to make films that have at least some essence of a better tomorrow, of a hopeful sort of tomorrow, even if I don't want to spoil the film entirely, even if their circumstances make it difficult for them to like function in that space or have a relationship in that space because of their circumstances. I think things are possible. Like I think things can get better, but it's really hard. I think some of the problems that these young people face and the country that they live in is not really tied to their own ability to change the situation, the political situation in that country, which is sort of like hinted at throughout the film, but I never like deal with it head on. And I explained to you earlier how it's tied into the Constitution, right? Like the peace agreement created a system where everything is looked at through the prism of ethnicity. And even to this day, like 25 years removed from the war. And in a large part, it has to, like the international community is like a huge culprit of like enforcing that mandate. They empower the people that waged the war to actually set the peace, which just makes no sense. But like, and they never managed to kind of find a new framework for this peace, right? Like there's no, you know, Croatia and Serbia likewise would need to kind of really sit together because they're signatories of the peace treaty. Like people forget that like Bosnian peace is the signatories are Serbia and Croatia just as much as is Bosnia. So like they would have to be like an effort on behalf of the sort of the neighbors and like the international community to actually engage with that issue. And I think the young people, the young generation can serve as a mechanism to kind of allow for that to be understood by the international community, because it's not something that can be done from within entirely, because you're in a cage, right? Like you're in an institutional cage, and that cage was placed by the international community. It wasn't set from within. They were asked to figure it out, but it's kind of hard to do that when you're not holding these people accountable, right?
And then what does it mean to you to have your film shown as part of the Berlin Film Festival, you know, in terms of, I guess, having a platform, and people, you know, might not have seen film based in this country before, or might not know much about it, kind of getting a window into what life is like there?
It's really exciting to be part of the Berlinale. It's almost like the unique edition. It's never going to be repeated. So our expectations are like unknown, like, because this part of the festival is not open to the public, right? It's not open to it's only open to industry and press. So it's kind of strange because you don't get a feel for you know, people watching the film. It's just colleagues and people that are like sort of in that industry. So like it's good to have such an important festival sort of recognize the film, because it does help a film sort of register and hopefully have more ability to kind of be seen by people at some point. But at the same time, because everything is still virtual, those little things, right, like that you miss at film festivals, or like public screenings, you know, engaging with the people outside of the screening room, or like hearing their feedback, you know, during the Q&A, those kinds of things. Now, like the Q&As are usually just taped, right? Or they don't have them. For this film, they're going to have the summer special, so they're going to have the ability for people to watch the films in a public setting. So it kind of, it makes me appreciate cinema in a whole new way this pandemic, and hopefully people likewise will find that same appreciation of like this kind of communal experience, watching a film from another country with you know, an amazing cast of actors and crew behind it, and you know, and one of the sort of interesting things about this edition is how few films there are. Usually you have about 300. I think there's like 100 this year. So like being able to, you know, create like such a curated program that's even smaller, hopefully people are able to kind of appreciate it even more, right? Because there's fewer titles to get through. So I have like so many mixed emotions about you know, the theatrical experience versus the digital one, but all in all, like, we're gonna see how the second sort of phase of the festival goes, so we can finally get even more feedback from the public.
Yeah, definitely. And then just finally, very quickly, do you already know what you might tackle for your next film or project, or maybe you've already started? I don't know.
So yeah, I mean, I have a few projects always on the sort of in the docket, so to speak. But the one that I'm developing right now is based on a short film I did last year called The Archivist. It's a dystopian musical. It's a very kind of hopeful dystopia, and it's like these traveling bands that kind of find and reimagine old records.
Oh, amazing. Can't wait to see that as well.
I can send you the link to the short. Yeah.
Oh yeah, please. Well, thank you so much for sharing all that with me, and best of luck. Yeah, guess now that this part of the festival is over, and fingers crossed I'll have people watching it in cinemas by June, so that'll be really exciting.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks for your time. Cheers. Sorry to speak to you. See you. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
You too.
Bye. Bye.